Institute of Politics at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. I think it's especially timely to have Charlie here with us today on this Super Tuesday, and we're grateful that he's chosen to spend part of such an important day in the election cycle with us. So here to tell us what's going on now through November and what it all means is one of the all-time experts. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Mr. Charlie Cook.
Thanks, Rick. I'm going to recycle the old joke about that Dick Wiley emailed me and asked me if I believed in free speech, and I said, of course, and so he said, how would you like to give one? Anyway, but we've all heard it before, but it's an oldie but a goodie. But this was really kind of fun. Duffy Cannell here was one of my first employees back in the 80s, right out of college before he went to law school. And very, very, very proud. He's gone legit. And actually our daughter, who now has two little girls, was the flower girl in Duffy Sierra's wedding. So how about that? I understand that in this room that some of you are Democrats and some of you are Republicans, but I'll promise you this: 75–80% of you will be depressed when you leave this room. And it's kind of a bipartisan depression, but that's kind of where we are in American politics these days. Because that introduction was so long, I'm going to skip my jokes at the front end. But I like to tell my Democratic friends, if I were you, I would pray morning, noon, and night that the president changes his mind and doesn't run for re-election, or if he does, that the Democrats don't nominate Vice President Harris. If you were a Republican, I would suggest you pray morning, noon, and night that the president doesn't change his mind, or that if he does, that Vice President Harris wins the Democratic nomination, because it's kind of a codependency, is that Donald Trump is probably the only Republican that President Biden could beat, and Trump is about the only Republican that Biden could beat. And so here we are. Is this a great country or what? But at this point, I don't think that there's any political, and I'm not a lawyer, or legal event that's going to intervene between now and November. So, unless one or the other has some kind of an adverse medical event, this is our matchup, and I get to save some time not talking about the Republican nomination, although during Q&A, if you'd like to, we can. But obviously this is an election between two of the most disliked public figures in American politics, and that it's really kind of you wonder how the hell did we get here? But let's broaden back up or go up to like 50,000 feet. That you hear people say, "Wow, the country's evenly divided," and I know everybody's heard that before. But I don't think people really appreciate quite as much just how evenly divided. And we all remember, or the older ones of us remember, the 2000 Bush-Gore, where it came down to 537 votes. Then fast forward to 2016, that Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote by 2 percentage points, about 3 million votes, but lost the Electoral College by a total of 78,000 votes in 3 states. Then we fast forward to 2020, and while yes, President Joe Biden did win the election by 4.5 percentage points, about 7 million votes, but the reality is that he won by a total of 126,000 votes in 4 states. And that's really, really close. And you know the recent history in the Senate, 50-50, then 51-49, House coming out of 2 consecutive elections with a majority of less than 6 seats or less. This country just couldn't be split anymore. And then you look at sort of the partisan structure, and when you sort of look at it closely, what you'll see is you got like 30% over here that said, I am a Republican. About 30% say, I'm a Democrat. And 95% of those people will vote that way. But that leaves the other 40% that say they're undecided. Now I say they're undecided because 3/4 of them aren't. That 3/4 of them, if you just ask them one simple question, would you say you lean to the Democratic side or do you lean to the Republican side? 3/4 of them lean one way or the other and vote that way 85% of the time. So the reality is that honest to God, pure independence, only about 8 or 10 percentage points of the total electorate. Now, this 8 or 10%, sadly, they watch, listen, read news less than the 90% that are partisans. They tend to be very fickle. They tend to get buyer's remorse. They tend to punish more than reward. And they don't tend to pay that much attention until fairly late in the process. And so if you think about it, I realize it's very undemocratic, but the people who probably should least be determinative in an election are the ones that are. Because the group over here, the group over here, we know how the only question is do they show up, but we know how they're going to vote if they're going to vote. The other thing, we were talking about this over lunch, is that the makeup of the parties has changed really just sort of remarkably so. And then I'm going to dive into the presidential, but Bill McInturf, or Public Opinion Strategies and Hart Research, do the polling for NBC News, and it used to be NBC and Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal went off, and they do have their own different bipartisan polling team now. But McInturf pulled together some numbers looking at 2012 and 2022. And the percentage of all Republicans who were white and had college degrees in those 10 years dropped from 40 to 25%. 40 to 25. The percentage that were white and did not have a college degree went up 13 points, from 48 to 61%. And then the percentage that were not white stayed at 12, actually did go to 13 the very next year. So the Republican Party has gone more downscale populist, and actually just you've had, white, college-educated, more but not exclusively women moving from the Republican Party over into the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, you have working class, originally it was whites, now it's starting to kind of bleed down to African Americans and Latinos, moving over the opposite direction from the Democratic side over into the Republican side. And we're actually starting to see younger people starting to move down towards independence. But the composition of these parties just totally different from where they were not that long ago. So if you were to say, well, Donald Trump could not have won a Republican nomination 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, that's absolutely true. But a Mitt Romney, John McCain, either of the Bushes, Ronald Reagan, anybody with that ideological configuration could not win a Republican nomination now. And just to be bipartisan about it, I remember back in, when Bill Clinton was president, and I'd hear people in the business community moan and groan and how liberal the Clinton administration was, and this and this and this and that. And then until you got, fast forward a little bit, and the Obama folks come in, and you hear some of these same business people or their successors say, well, Clinton wasn't that bad, he wasn't this liberal. And I expect soon to be hearing some of these same people or their successors say, well, the Obama administration wasn't quite this progressive, you know. I mean, you know, it's the parties are just moving in opposite directions, and the group of people that are sort of in the middle, looking out and looking lonely, are the ones in the middle. But with the Electoral College, you know, you could independent third-party candidates could be spoilers, but they can't be victors. So there we are. So this election is taking place just in a time of just profound pessimism. You know, the new Wall Street Journal poll came out over the weekend. Right direction, 21. Wrong track, 69%. NBC's was 22. Right direction, 73. Wrong track. Back, Dick Werthland was President Reagan's pollster, and he used to call that question the Dow Jones indicator of American politics, just of the public mood. And while it's sort of been stuck on pessimistic for a long time, but this is about the longest period of profound pessimism that we've ever had. And that's obviously is an important backdrop. Now, one of the things I like to do is to ask myself, okay, what is this election about? And we know that elections involving incumbent presidents, sitting presidents, generally it's a referendum up or down on that incumbent. Now, 2016, obviously there wasn't an incumbent, the Trump and Hillary Clinton race, but you know, Hillary Clinton had, I think, what just about everybody could agree was the most horrible last month that any presidential nominee ever had, and you know, Comey and emails and all that kind of stuff. So that in the end, even as polarizing, controversial, colorful, whatever you want to call it, as Donald Trump is, the election ended up being about Hillary Clinton, you know, when all was said and done. 2020, it was an incumbent year, and it really was about Donald Trump. And again, he lost, but you know, 126,000 votes, it isn't much, but it was about him, and really didn't have much at all to do with President Biden. Now, let me just say something. I usually don't say anything about my own personal political views, and I think that's been a good policy for a long time. But, you know, I got my start working on the Democratic side, working for a guy from my hometown who's running for the Senate as a Democrat. And, you know, a lot of my jobs early on, never worked for a Republican, but always on the Democratic side or the business side, and met Joe Biden back in 1973 when he was a freshman senator and I was a freshman in college working for one of his colleagues. And I like the guy a lot, I really do, which is why I get so uncomfortable saying things that are critical of him, but I really, really do like him a lot. But the 2020 election wasn't about him. I mean, it just sort of really, really wasn't. But the thing about this election, 2024, that I think is so distinctive is that this is the first election in 132 years that we've had back-to-back presidents facing off into a rematch. And we all, you know, fondly remember Senator Benjamin Harrison running against and beating President Grover Cleveland. And then 4 years, that was in 1888, and then 4 years later, 1892, was when former President Cleveland came back and beat President Harrison. But that back-to-back president gives it a different feel than any other kind of presidential race, whether there's an incumbent or not, but it's a completely different feel for it. And it invites the question, were you better off before January 20th, 2021, or are you better off now? And you know, that sort of framework just sort of doesn't exist, has never existed, you know, at least certainly in our lifetime. Now, just to kind of go back and recap, after when President Biden took office, his approval rating back in, like, you know, the end of January, and I'm using Gallup numbers here, February, March, April, May, June, basically it was in the mid to high 50s, 54 to 57%, averaged 56%, January through June. And then, until June, then in June or July, between June and July, his approval rating dropped 6 points, down to 50, and then another point in August, and then in September dropped another 6 points. So that, and now you remember inflation started kind of coming up in April, just a little bit, but started moving up. And you know, you had like 2 generations that have never experienced. I mean, inflation was something that was in history books and textbooks and stuff. So that, you know, this was a new experience. Now, starting in September of 21, as far as here, September 21, President Biden's job approval rating has been in this range of 37 to 44%. And really very inelastic during that time. I mean, that good things can happen, it doesn't go above 44, bad things can happen, it doesn't go below 37. Just this tight little trading range, if you will. And, you know, as of February, it was a 38% approve and 59% disapprove. And his 38 was 1 point above his record low in that Gallup poll. The 59% disapproval is tied with 5 other months for the highest disapprove. But just to put that in a historical context, in November, again, this is just using Gallup, because for historic purposes, you really can only use Gallup. But in November, the president was at 37% approval. Now, that was the lowest of any of the 9 elected presidents in the post-war era, the lowest for a November 1 year before the election. Then in December, it was 39%, which was the lowest for a December before the re-election year. Then in January, it was 41%, the lowest for a January of a re-election year. And February, 38%, the lowest for February. And this includes Carter, George H.W. Bush, Donald Trump, and includes the 3 presidents who lost re-election. But point is, there's just no elasticity that's there. And that it's like where to go next. And again, this unique aspect of this election offers that when, you know, the New York Times Siena College poll came out over the weekend, and they asked, you know, did the policies of when Trump was president, did they help you personally, hurt you personally? Not much. And for Donald Trump, his policies helped me personally, 40%, hurt me personally, 25%, 34% said not much difference, but a net plus 15 points for Trump. For Biden, helped me personally was 18, hurt me personally, 43, not much difference, 39%. So he's underwater 25 points. And, you know, Fox News, which has a very, very good poll, they asked, policies help you and your family, you know, or hurt you. For Trump, it was help me 45, hurt me 32. For Biden, it was hurt me or help me 25%, hurt me 48. And, you know, I can go through a bunch of other pollsters, but they all basically show the same thing. Now, we could argue about whether people ought to feel that way or not, and whether they're justified. I mean, yeah, but if that's what they think, that's what they think. And something got them to that point. And that even things that you'd think would be easy ones, like, how about this? This is the NBC poll. Protecting democracy. Okay? Who does this apply more to? Biden, 43. Trump, 41. Really? Really? I guess that's what trying to get people thrown off ballots will do for you. But the thing is, you know, yes, there are things that Biden did better. Abortion, 44-32. But being competent and effective. Trump, that applied more to Trump in the minds of 48%, applied more to Biden and 32%. So a 16-point difference. But again, you can go through issue by issue, characteristic by characteristic, and I can't say across the board, but almost across the board, you know, like say 70% of the questions, they come down on a way that's not really helpful to the president. And that when you zone it in on economy and inflation and crime and border, it gets a lot worse. Now, the Democratic theory of the case had been the economy is getting better and consumer confidence will rise. And when consumer confidence rises, then the president's approval rating will come up. And that approval rating is the best indicator of how an incumbent president is going to do. So the economy did get better, more stable. Inflation came down. Consumer confidence starting in December, but a lot in January went up. And you know, there's always a little noise, but consumer confidence has gone up, and the president's numbers haven't. Now, I think, you know, looking back to 2021, you know, I think, you know, inflation kind of jutting up. Now, that was certainly a big piece of it. I don't think it lasted long, but I think Afghanistan, you know, that was, you know, I don't think it had a long memories, but at the time, you know, it made the fall of Saigon look fairly dignified. Then you had the photo, you know, see the visuals from the border coming across like in a ways that you'd never seen before. So, I mean, that's what brought him down. But the thing is, for the people who say, well, now that the economy's getting better, his numbers ought to go back up. But the thing is, it wasn't just about the economy. It was also border. It was also just sort of this broader thing of competence and all that. And then we get to the health age thing. And it's absolutely true that President Biden is only, 3 years and 7 months older than Donald Trump. But we all know that in politics, perception is more important than reality. And while Biden may only be, 3.5 years older than Trump, he probably looks 10 or 12 years older. And he looks a heck of a lot older than he did back in 2020. Now, whether that's a standard that people ought to use or not, and the Biden folks will say, well, the actuarial tables say that he should survive this fine. Yeah, okay, we're not talking about survival. We're talking about being top of the game, 24/7, whatever. And everybody, both sides have blind spots, and some of us remember how critical Democrats were that Ronald Reagan was too old when he was president. And of course, Biden today is 4 years older than Reagan was when Reagan left office, which was 77. 11 years older than Eisenhower was when he left office at age 70. 18 years older than FDR was when he died in his early in his fourth term. So just to kind of put that in context, but when you ask, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, just too old to be an effective president. And Biden agrees 70, this is that New York Times call, Biden 73, disagree 25. Trump 42 agree, 55 disagree. And we can go to the Wall Street Journal, we can go to NBC. I mean, all these numbers where and that's why, just the appearances and when people see him, they say, gosh, that's a really, really old looking guy. And I know it'd be interesting if we went out here on 16th Street and Biden and Trump did a 100-yard dash. First of all, we'd probably be there for the afternoon. But I'm not entirely sure which one would win. Whether it be Biden, who works out 3 times a week and rides a bike from time to time, or Trump, who's been known to drive his golf cart up onto the putting green. But the thing about it is, and that probably shouldn't be the standard, but it is what it is. And when that kind of fuses in with the competence thing, it becomes a real problem. And so these are sort of the Biden related. But some of this doesn't really have anything personally to do with Biden, or for that matter, Trump. Now, we've had, in the last 6 elections, we've had, in the last 6 elections, Democrats have won the national popular vote in 5 out of the last 6. But they've only won the Electoral College in 3 of the last 6. And you remember the 2 inversions, 2000 Bush Gore and 2016 Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and came within 126,000 votes of that happening again in 2020. But why is this when we had only had 3 times in American history, 3 times in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, where one candidate won the popular vote and the other one won the electoral college vote? Why is this happening or almost happening so often, 2000, 2016, and almost 2020? And you hear Democrats complain, well, the electoral college is tilted in favor of Republicans. Well, technically, as far as it goes, that's true, but I don't think that's really probably the best way to look at it. And the reality is, in 48 states, all except for Maine and Nebraska, so 48 states plus the District of Columbia, you win a state by 1 vote, and you get all the electors, winner take all. And you don't get bonus electors for running up the score, right? So in 2020, Democrats wasted over 14 million votes running up the score in highly populous states, and Republicans wasted only 7.8 million. Now let's kind of fine. So in 2020, Biden won California by a margin of 5.1 million votes, like 11.1 million to 6 million. He won California by a 2 million vote margin, 5.2 to 3.3. Massachusetts, 1.2 million. Illinois, 1 million. Maryland, 1 million. Washington State and New Jersey each between 700,000 and 800,000. So if you rank order all the states in the union by wasted votes, states 1 through 7 were states that Biden carried, and it's only when you got down to states 8, 9, and 10, 8 Tennessee, 9 Texas, and 10 Alabama, do you get to a state where Republicans wasted more votes. But it's actually kind of worse than that, because we've had 4 presidential elections in a row where the top 7 states, in terms of wasted votes, all went Democratic. So this is like a real chronic problem. And the interesting thing to me is that after World War II, in 8 of the first 12 presidential elections, it was Republicans who were wasting more votes. And then starting in '92, it sort of flipped over the other way. But that's why, I think we should have learned by now that national polls are useful to tell you, who's gaining, who's losing, see which way the arrow's going, but obviously is not determinative of who wins. And that's why I think these swing state polls are really important, because it focuses you on in a way that is determining, will be determinative. And just this last week, Bloomberg News and Morning Consult released their set of 7 polls in swing states, and kind of aggregate them all together, and Trump was ahead by 5 points, 48-43. And the margins range from Trump ahead by 2 in Michigan to by 9 in North Carolina. New York Times haven't done it since the beginning of the year, but they had Trump up by 4, 48-44, with margins that range from 4 to 10. When you kind of go through and look at state by state by state, this is really fairly grisly. And occasionally, you will find a state where it was tied, or one. It was back in. The Real Clear Politics average has Pennsylvania, Biden up by 1. But when you're talking about these 7 states, Biden won 6 out of 7,